Hello, are people now gathered? Are they sufficiently gathered to embark upon a Mooting Masterclass? It will require great resilience, fortitude, and a seat. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming. I'm Sarah Phillimore. I'm a barrister at St John's Chambers in Bristol, and I was formerly at Coram Chambers in London. I've been a very enthusiastic student, debater, and mooter throughout my educational career. It's very obvious to me that it's helped me in my professional life. The very proudest moment of my career came early on when a judge told me that he had almost made a decision based on my persuasive advocacy. My client still lost, but the memory of that almost has stayed with me ever since as one of the proudest moments of my career. Now, that certainly probably says more about the calibre of my cases and my career than it does about the power of my advocacy. But it really does drive it home that when you're in that tribunal setting, some cases, of course, you've lost before you even step through the door. But there are many other cases where the persuasive talents of a good advocate can make the difference, all the difference in the world to your client. So I think it's a fantastic skill, and I think all of you who embark upon competitions of this nature are to be given great credit, because it's also been quite surprising to me as somebody who, say, sits on interview committees and looks at pupillage applications, how few people actually do engage in mooting and debating, which seems to be most odd if you're coming to what is still an adversarial profession in England and Wales. But anyway, I've been asked to come here today to give you a Mooting Masterclass, which was great. I was really looking forward to it until I got the email that said, we've had some very high calibre teams that have already gone through regional rounds, so feel free to pitch your masterclass at an advanced level. So I'm very sorry about that. Probably most of you in this room are probably much more advanced mooters than I ever was. I don't think I ever made it out of England. So I apologise in advance if what I have to say is of not much interest or use, but I hope I can touch upon some universal themes which are of benefit to all the mooters, from those just starting out to those who've achieved international prominence. I'm not going to talk about the structure of formal mooting, because all mooting competitions are subtly different. All of them should set out their own rules and requirements very clearly at the beginning. I'm not sure if much has changed since my day. We used to have teams of 4, 2 teams for respondents, 2 for appellants, and there were obviously rules in every competition about what you could do in terms of relying upon authorities, how you should cite, what you should present, and what the etiquette was. So I think there's little point in me trying to explore those structural formalities. Those are something that should be made clear to you as part of competition rules. The overarching key competency I think that every advocate needs is organisation. And that sounds very dull, and it is. But it's the one quality which, if you lack, all the natural talents, exuberance and charm in the world cannot make up for a haphazard lack of preparation or a lack of knowledge about what you're supposed to be doing. Now you, I assume, are the generation who are going to inherit the world of the digital courts and paperless trials, leaving the dinosaurs like me way behind in the past. I'm very much a creature of paper, highlighters and post-it notes. So however you feel comfortable in your preparation and marshalling your information is the way that you should do it. If you feel comfortable with highlighting stuff and sticking a bit of sticky paper in it, great. But make sure you have a system of organisation in order to marshal and present information that works for you. And every time an elder tries to come along and lecture you about the best way of doing things, then you may need to reject anything I say which is hopelessly old-fashioned. But hopefully, as I've said, the fundamental values that we're going to explore will apply regardless of any technological advances since my day, which is now an embarrassingly long time ago. So let's look at the absolute basics, and then let's have a look at the core competencies. I've already mentioned organisation, because without that, you might as well forget it, go home. The key competency, once you've got yourself organised, has got to be persuasiveness. That is the art of the advocate. But you can't be persuasive without the other core competencies, which I've identified as knowledge, clarity, and responsiveness. So we'll go through those in turn. But before we do, let's just take it right back to the absolute basics. The very first thing you need to do is breathe. Now, I was very fortunate at school. I stumbled into examinations with the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art, and we did competitions in the speaking of verse and prose. Now, although I didn't know it at the time, because I had no idea then where my future was going to take me, it was absolutely fantastic training for anybody who wants a career in public speaking. Because breathing is something you all do without thinking about it, but the wrong kind of breathing doesn't give you enough oxygen, makes your voice get higher, you feel more tense, you feel more anxious, you start to gabble, it becomes a vicious circle. So the quick, which people do if they're frightened or anxious, that is not getting enough oxygen into your body. The key breathing you need to be aware of is intercostal diaphragmatic breathing. So if you put your hands around your back and find your floating ribs, those ribs at the very bottom of your rib cage that aren't attached to your sternum, if you're breathing in and out properly, then you should feel those ribs move, shift a little as the diaphragm moves. And that's a nice deep breath. So before you start your submissions, or really before any endeavour that's going to make you feel a bit anxious, just take the time to take some deep, calm breaths in and out. That is intercostal diaphragmatic breathing, and that is what everybody needs to be aware of if they're going to be speaking in public. The other very obvious basic thing is just vary your tone and pace. Again, if people are nervous or very enthusiastic to get out what they want to communicate, they can often speak very quickly, they can gabble, and I know that's a problem I have. For example, I think I'm now talking to you in quite a normal, measured tone of voice, but I'm quite sure there'll be a number of people in the audience saying, slow down. It's a problem that I have. So, like I say, don't copy what I do, but listen to what I say. If you deliver anything in a monotone, people aren't going to listen, they're going to switch off. So it doesn't really matter how knowledgeable you are, people won't be hearing you. So a very good thing to do, and certainly now with the technology we all have in our smartphones, there's no excuse for not doing it. Tape yourselves, record yourself, just standing there and talking. It's amazing how many little tics you will then discover about your own presentation, which you weren't aware of, and your friends were perhaps too polite to tell you about. Just have a look about how you rock and shift and which bits of you fiddle with, and try and stop it. I'll never forget the deputy headmaster of my junior school. I don't think he was ever aware that he was doing this, but when he would talk to us, he would stand at the edge of the stage and rock back and forth, and we would all watch in fascinated horror, because at some point he was going to rock over the edge. Now, it had obviously something that was a subconscious comfort mechanism to him, and made it a lot easier to face the hundreds of beady-eyed adolescents. And of course, back in the day, I'm not going to tell you when, we didn't have any smartphones, so we couldn't record him. But just be aware, because I'm not saying you have to iron out every little quirk that makes you human, but there are things that we can do which are very off-putting, and we don't know we're doing them. So take advantage of modern technology. So if you've got all those basics in place, you're breathing, you're not rocking and twiddling with your hair. Of course, dress smartly, that's another obvious basic, because you don't want to be worried about egg stains on ties or unironed shirts. If you dress smartly, then you don't have to worry about it. You know you're fit for the role. So with those basics in place, let's have a look at the core competencies. Now, I think all the core competencies could be gathered perhaps in just one simple phrase. Advocacy is persuasion. And I think John W. Davis put it best. Now, John W. Davis, Wikipedia tells me, was born in 1873 and died in 1955. He was an American politician, diplomat, and lawyer. He served under President Woodrow Wilson as the Solicitor General of the United States, and he was the United States Ambassador to the United Kingdom. So this is a man who knew his onions when it came to persuasiveness, focus, and diplomacy. And what he said was this: the key to advocacy is focus. The advocate is angling consciously and deliberately for the judicial mind. Whatever tends to attract judicial favour is useful. whatever repels it is useless or worse. And many advocates will tell you many horror stories of how judges have taken against them, because judges may have given them a little hint that they didn't find their arguments useful or persuasive on this point, and the advocate bravely carries on, because that's obviously how you do your duty to your client. Not necessarily. You've got to do something quite difficult, both in a courtroom and in a mooting competition. You've not merely got to be able to present your client's case with great focus and clarity. You've got to take the judge with you, be it a judge of law or the judge of the competition. So how are you going to be persuasive? How are you going to achieve that focus? The first of the core competencies coming under the umbrella of persuasive focus, of course, is knowledge. Not just the law, but of the game. So that takes us back to what I said at the beginning about formal mooting structure. Obviously, you must know the rules of your competition. You must know what the court requires of you if you're in a courtroom. So make sure you know the rules of the game. Once you've got the rules of the game under your belt, you've got to know the law. You must understand what you have been instructed to argue for. Now, I'm sure if you speak to any barrister, they're delighted to tell you their anecdotes when things went horribly wrong. An alarmingly common anecdote of when things went horribly wrong is when barristers turn up at court thinking that they're representing one side and find out they're actually representing the other. Now, this should never ever happen, but appears to happen rather too close for comfort. It's quite easy to make mistakes if you read your brief in a hurry. It's quite easy to get the wrong end of the stick and then more difficult to correct it. So be very clear about what you are being asked to do and make sure you don't get tripped up by any uncertainty about the mooting basics. So you've got your knowledge and you know you're within the framework of the rules of the competition. How do you go about setting out that knowledge? I would say certainly don't ever write a script. Or if you do write a script, distill it into some bullet points and practice using the bullet points. Scripts can be extremely comforting when you start out and you're nervous, but it is immediately obvious who is reading from a script. And what that will do is utterly torpedo your chances of then demonstrating the other core competencies, say of responsiveness and persuasiveness. So ditch the script. By all means, start off with a script, but then distill it down to some handy bullet points. And also another good tip is to remember your stock phrases. Now, in a court and a mooting competition, nobody cares what you think. You must submit. You submit to your lordship this, that, or the other. This concludes my submissions on behalf of the appellant, unless your lordship has any further questions, is a nice, elegant stock phrase. These can be very helpful because they can tell the tribunal when you've started and when you've stopped. If you just come to a halt at the end of a sentence without some little stock sign-off, it might be difficult for the tribunal to realise you've finished. So that's knowledge of the law and of the game. The next core competency is clarity, because all the knowledge in the world is useless if you are not clear. And that goes back to what I said earlier about tone and pace. Of course, there is room for the odd rhetorical flourish and an elegant turn of phrase. But if you know you are the kind of would-be lawyer who enjoys long, winding sentences with many subordinate clauses, you will lose your audience, and probably yourself as well. Again, that's a fun anecdote that many barristers can tell you, myself included, about forgetting halfway through a question in cross-examination what the question actually was because we'd been so long-winded about it. It's a really difficult skill to get things short and sweet, but it's certainly one worth practicing. So short, crisp submissions, no long, winding sentences. The last core competency I can identify is responsiveness. And again, a lot of these ideas overlap each other to a very large extent. For example, under responsiveness, I go back to the point about a script again. It's hard to do anything effectively off a script that you're reading. Now, memorising a script as an actor, that's fine, because unless you're very unlucky, the audience aren't going to suddenly jump up and interrupt and ask awkward questions. But clearly, a mooting competition or a real-life trial, is not the opportunity for you to simply recite your script. It's a dynamic, interactive relationship between you and whoever is commanding the tribunal. Because, and of course, a very important part of mooting is that you are going to be judged on how well you respond to questions and interventions. Now, some questions will be genuine inquiries after knowledge. Other questions may be more deliberately hostile, just to test how you are under pressure. How are you going to respond if the judge tries to trip you up? Now, a big part of responsiveness and persuasiveness, I think, is being charming. And that's always been my last resort. If you're asked the actual killer question that you've just got no comeback to, it never hurts to try to be charming. My favourite anecdote is one of the rare occasions that I appeared in front of the Court of Appeal. I don't know why I was there. It was an absolutely hopeless case. I think my client had been a litigant in person, and Lord Justice Wall felt sorry for her and bumped us up to a 3-judge Court of Appeal. So when you go into one of the more senior courts of the land with an utterly useless case, if you're lucky, you will, as I did, go beyond that place of fear to a place of calm. When the judge asks you a question, but Ms. Phillimore, what on earth is going to be the response of the Portuguese police to this rather alarming submission you make? My response was, I must regret, my lord, I'm utterly ignorant as to the views of the Portuguese police. But I said it charmingly, and I got a laugh. I mean, obviously, we lost, but it's far better if you can have that degree of Zen-like calm beyond fear, because I think this is quite a human trait. I think we all feel it. If somebody is panicking and struggling, it sets off a very uneasy dynamic, and the less nice of us in the room may scent blood and scent fear. And there can be some unpleasant judges in any context who will actually enjoy seeing a young lawyer struggle before them and work on that. Sad but true. And I think there are probably, if we're honest, there's a little bit of that in all of us. It's quite fun to watch somebody flail. So don't be that person. Don't flail. Always have some little charming phrase up your sleeve. And if you are lucky, as I was, the tribunal will find you charming, and then your loss may be less bitter. I'm not saying it will secure victory, it certainly won't, but it might make the losing a bit easier to bear. So all these different things I'm telling you, you've got to be focused, you've got to be persuasive, you've got to be clear, you've got to be responsive, you've got to have knowledge. So how do you achieve all of those things? Well, we come back full circle to where we started. The overarching and very dull, I'm afraid, but very necessary competency is organisation. You have to build your house on firm foundations. If you don't know the law, unsure about your case or what you're arguing, you're worrying about a stain on your shirt, I don't see how you can ever be able to be calm, clear and persuasive. And all the natural talent in the world won't help you if you cannot demonstrate those core competencies. But at the end of it all, the most important thing, of course, as with any endeavour in life, is to enjoy it. You are here, I assume, because you have a natural tendency to enjoy the sound of your own voice. I don't think anybody goes into mooting unless that's quite a big motivating factor. So enjoy it. Of course, winning competitions and gaining plaudits is very sweet indeed, but it's also great fun to compete and to know that in so doing you are honing your very necessary skills, because what you want to be, I assume, are advocates. And that is a glorious thing, to be an advocate. A sobering statistic I always recall, I don't know how true it is, but it said that when a number of American citizens were polled, there was a greater fear of public speaking than there was a fear of death. Now that is, if true, astonishing. So be those people who can rise above those fears and be advocates. Because as the famous quote has it, we must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. what you're doing, I think, is putting a very small but valuable part of the jigsaw into making up the bigger picture of you as advocates. And I do think that that is a glorious and a very necessary thing. So well done to everybody for being here, for listening to my masterclass, and I hope you go on to much greater things than I ever did. So it's only 20 to 4, so I think if anyone's got any questions, there is time for some questions. I think, are we finishing about 4 o'clock? Sorry? Oh, 4:15. Very sorry, I was obviously speaking far too fast, which has always been a particular problem of mine. So if anybody has any questions?
Hi, my name is Valeria. So my question is, every time when I speak, I think that I always make the right accents, that I always want to draw attention to the words that I'm saying, but in the end my teammates but maybe you should be a little bit more expressive. So aside from, for example, taping yourself, maybe you have some kind of advice about how to be more expressive, when you clearly thinking that you're expressive, when you're completely not aware that you're sounding like some professor that's 19 years old and saying the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of things you could do. I used to think that public speaking was a natural talent and you had it or you didn't. But that proved not to be true. When I was lecturing for a brief period at the City University in London, we had some mooting and debating classes where we taped one another and we practiced, and people did get remarkably better over the course of a term. And I think the real advantage I've had over a lot of my peers is the lambda route, because what you would have to do for those examinations was learn poems off by heart and recite them. And of course, it was hugely embarrassing for me, because I don't think you can be anything other than who you are, but you can be a better version of who you are. If you are not naturally ebullient and expressive, then you're not. And to force yourself into that role is humiliating and difficult. But you can, I'm sure, crank it up a notch. If you are quite sedate and calm in your speech, then you can, I think, add a little bit of oomph. But no one will be asking you to stride around like Marshall Hall and declaiming, because that's just not you. So you do need to find something within your comfort zone. And I think learning poetry, reciting poetry, that's actually really helpful, because poetry is about condensing very complex ideas into very little language. So it does matter how you speak the words. So I would think, carry on taping yourself, try reciting some poems or some plays, and try and get some honest feedback from people. That's always the most difficult thing, I know, because people don't want to be unkind. But I do firmly now believe that within the parameters of your own natural personality and limitations, you can improve. But you can't make yourself something that you're not. That's obviously true. So that would be my suggestion. Just recite poetry.
Third time is a charm. How to transition from regular debating with, let's say, social arguments to proper mooting?
Well, the clear distinction between mooting and debating is mooting has a much more formal framework to which you must abide, because you're going to be judged on it. You're going to be judged on the authorities that you cite and how you cite them. Debating is much more about showmanship, isn't it? I mean, there is a structure, there are rules, you have to notionally respond to the topic. But to be honest, I did perhaps enjoy debating a little bit more than mooting, because it is a bit more of an anarchic free-for-all, and you can just go a bit crazy. So debating certainly suits the more flamboyant and expressive of the advocates. Mooting obviously ties you down to a much more formal structure, and it is more serious. There's less room for jokes, and you're not playing the room in the same way. But if you're a good debater, you should be a good mooter. I'm not sure if it crosses over the other way as easily, because as I say, it's about your natural personality and whether you can be that kind of expressive, gung-ho character. But I do think both of them are very important, because they are exposing different skill sets, and all of those will be very useful in a more formal court environment. I mean, debating certainly will give you the confidence to deal with quite hostile audiences, if I can remember rightly from my days as a student debater.
What would the advice be as to how to keep your cool or your poker face, so to say, when you feel provoked by a judge or you don't necessarily agree with him or you're unsure about the answer?
Well, when you've got a few years under your belt, you're going to enjoy those experiences very much, because it's amazing just how rude you can be while being extremely composed and polite. So it's actually one of my favourite things ever to meet a judge who's being provocative or rude or unhelpful, because you can then be quite calm. But that does, I appreciate, take confidence and quite a few years. When you're just starting out, then it's a lot more difficult, because it is really nerve-wracking. It'd be quite frightening. So I think I'd go back to what I said about stock phrases. If a judge is being quite deliberately unhelpful, what's the favourite stock phrase everyone uses? Oh, is it something like, of course, I hear your lordship. I appreciate your lordship's point, if I may just refer to. You just have to be scrupulously polite and try and show that you're not rattled. That's why having some stock phrases is good. If all else fails, try to be a bit charming. If that's not going to work, then I think all you can do is just try not to cry, because that's when it gets really ugly. But of course, the more confident you are, the easier it will be. I mean, I do remember as quite a junior barrister being horribly bullied by a judge, that it was just so over the top and ridiculous that, again, I went from that place of fear to a place of calm. And perhaps that is what you should all be searching for. You need to find that place of calm. And the judge was threatening to throw out my case and order costs. And I knew he couldn't, because this was a case involving 2 small children. So I had that certainty of knowing that this was just a judge in a very bad mood. So I was able to be calm, and at the end of it, the ushers were silently applauding me, which was lovely. But hopefully you're not going to meet people like that. It is unusual, and there's clearly been a lot of efforts to get rid of, say, the more dinosaurs in the profession who enjoy bullying, especially young female advocates, and hopefully they're on their way out. And hopefully you'll never ever meet anyone like that at a mooting competition. So use this as your playground to try and get that confidence. But what you need to do is find the calm place, because once you're in your calm place, then nobody can get you out. So easier said than done, I know.
What would be your What would be your top tips for rebuttal and surrebuttal? I want to keep that as open as possible.
Oh, it's really difficult. I did have some moots where I thought they were just so unfair, because all the law was on one side and none of the law was on the other side. And I can't now remember how we got through those. But again, I think it was just falling back on the charm and the confidence. If you've got a duff point, if it's the only point you've still got to make it. And if the judge is clearly uninterested, then you don't labour it. Make it and move on. But I remember being quite surprised as a student to how many of the mooting competitions did seem to be very unfairly skewed in terms of the law. I would hope that the problems would be much more balanced, and that both sides would have something to say. But I'm afraid I haven't really got any snappy response to that. You've got much more of a harder job if the law's not on your side. But in a way, it could be an advantage, because if you put up a bit of a plucky fight, then I'd imagine as a judge you're going to get more credit for that, because you've had to work harder, but you're going to be needing to marshal all your skills of knowledge, organisation and persuasiveness if the law is actually difficult for you. Sorry, I know that's quite vague and woolly, but really a lot of it's the luck of the draw. And I don't know if you're finding that in the competitions you're involved in, but if you haven't got the law on your side, it's an uphill struggle. But that's life, and that's what you may be called upon to do as an advocate in real life. So it's still a good discipline, but I appreciate it's not often that much fun. Okay, well, if that is the end of the questions, then thank you very much for having me, and good luck with your competing.